In 2026, money doesn't move the way it usually does. For some people, results arrive earlier than expected. Opportunities show up faster. Decisions turn into income sooner. And for others, despite working just as hard, nothing seems to stick. This gap isn't about effort, and it isn't about being smarter or luckier. It's about timing and whether you're positioned to move with the year or against it. The Fire Horse year is known for speed. It accelerates what's already in motion. If something in your life is aligned, it gets pushed forward quickly. If something is unstable, the cracks show just as fast. That's why 2026 feels different. It doesn't give you much time to wait and see. It responds almost immediately, and that's where people either gain momentum or lose ground. When we talk about getting rich faster in 2026, we're not talking about overnight success or risky shortcuts. We're talking about earlier returns, earlier clarity, earlier movement of money. Some people will notice that what used to take years now takes months. Not because they suddenly changed who they are, but because the year amplifies certain traits and patterns more than others. And this is where the Chinese Zodiac comes in. In Feng Shui, not every year treats everyone the same. Some years are balanced, some are reflective, and some, like 2026, are highly selective. The Fire Horse doesn't spread its energy evenly. It rewards people who naturally match its rhythm, and it pressures those who don't. That's why, in this particular year, only 7 zodiac signs consistently find themselves moving ahead faster financially. This isn't about belief. It's about observing patterns that repeat over decades. Who tends to benefit when speed increases? Who handles pressure well? Who knows when to act and when to hold back? In this video, we're going to look closely at those 7 zodiac signs, not to hype them up, but to understand why they move faster in 2026, where their advantage comes from, and just as importantly, where they can lose it if they're not careful. Because in a year like this, money doesn't just arrive quickly. It tests how well you're prepared to keep it. Part 1. What does get rich faster really mean in 2026? When people hear the phrase get rich faster, most of them imagine extremes, overnight success stories, risky bets, sudden windfalls that disappear as quickly as they arrive. That's not what 2026 is about. In this year, faster doesn't mean reckless or dramatic. It means earlier. Earlier results, earlier clarity, earlier movement of money compared to what people are used to. The Fire Horse year doesn't magically create wealth out of nothing. It accelerates what is already aligned. If your actions, habits, and timing are positioned correctly, the response comes sooner. If they're not, the delay you might expect in other years simply doesn't exist. You find out very quickly whether something works or not. In practical terms, this is the kind of year where decisions don't sit quietly in the background. A career move doesn't take 3 years to show results, it shows momentum within months. A financial choice doesn't slowly reveal its impact, it speaks almost immediately through cash flow, pressure, or relief. This is why so many people describe 2026 as intense without fully understanding why. It's not that life becomes harder across the board. It's that feedback becomes faster. And fast feedback changes how money behaves in your life. For many people in the US, especially those who value stability and predictability, this can feel unsettling. We're used to gradual progress, save steadily, build patiently, wait for the payoff. The Fire Horse year doesn't erase that logic, but it compresses time. What used to unfold slowly now unfolds in tighter cycles. This is where the idea of getting rich faster becomes less about ambition and more about positioning. Those who are aligned notice that income streams activate earlier, opportunities arrive with less friction, and effort converts into results with fewer delays. Those who are misaligned feel like they're constantly reacting, fixing, or catching up. Another important distinction is that faster wealth in 2026 isn't always louder wealth. It doesn't always look like promotions, headlines, or dramatic leaps. Often, it looks like money flowing more smoothly, decisions becoming easier, and fewer setbacks interrupting progress. People may not realize they're doing better until they look back and notice how much ground they've covered in a shorter amount of time. This subtlety is exactly why many miss what's happening. They're waiting for a big sign, while the real advantage is unfolding quietly through timing. What makes this year different is that it doesn't reward effort alone. Hard work still matters, but effort without direction burns energy instead of producing results. The fire horse energy magnifies direction, not struggle. That's why two people can work equally hard in 2026 and experience completely different financial outcomes. One feels carried forward, while the other feels exhausted. The difference isn't character or intelligence, it's alignment with the year's rhythm. This is also why patience needs to be redefined. In slower years, patience means waiting. In 2026, patience means choosing carefully and acting decisively when the moment appears. Hesitation costs more than usual, and impulsiveness costs even more. Wealth moves fastest toward those who can recognize the window, step into it without panic, and step out before momentum turns into pressure. That balance is rare, and it's exactly what the fire horse year tests. When viewed this way, getting rich faster isn't a promise, it's a condition. The year creates an environment where speed exists, but only certain people can use it productively. Others experience the same speed as stress, instability, or loss. This is why understanding who naturally fits this pattern matters so much. The Chinese Zodiac isn't about labels or destiny, it's about recognizing behavioral tendencies that consistently perform better under specific conditions. In 2026, 7 zodiac signs happen to carry traits that respond well to fast cycles, quick feedback, and intensified momentum. As we move forward, the key question isn't whether money can move faster in 2026, it clearly can. The real question is whether you are positioned in a way that allows speed to work for you instead of against you. And that's exactly what the next section begins to uncover: why only 7 zodiac signs consistently find themselves ahead of the curve in a year that doesn't slow down for anyone. Part 2: Why only 7 zodiac signs move ahead faster. Every year creates a different financial climate, much like an economy does. Some years favor caution, some reward patience, others quietly punish excess. What makes 2026 different is that it does not spread its pressure or opportunity evenly. The fire horse year concentrates energy. It accelerates movement, shortens reaction time, and exposes mismatches quickly. That is why only certain people consistently move ahead faster, not because they are chosen, but because they are naturally built to function well when speed increases. One of the biggest misunderstandings about Feng Shui and the Chinese Zodiac is the idea of fairness. Many people assume that if a year is strong, everyone should benefit equally. In reality, years behave more like weather systems. A strong wind helps those who know how to adjust their sails. For others, the same wind creates resistance, instability, or fatigue. The fire horse year is exactly that kind of wind. It pushes hard, and it does not slow down to accommodate hesitation or confusion. The 7 zodiac signs that move ahead faster in 2026 share one important trait: they don't fight the pace of the year. Some of them are naturally decisive, some are adaptable, some remain calm under pressure, others instinctively know when to step forward and when to pause. These qualities matter far more than ambition in a year like this. When the environment speeds up, the people who thrive are not the loudest or the most aggressive, but the ones whose internal rhythm matches the external one. Another reason the field narrows to 7 signs is how 2026 handles feedback. In slower years, mistakes can stay hidden for a long time. Poor decisions might not show consequences until much later, giving people the illusion that everything is fine. The fire horse year removes that buffer. Outcomes appear quickly. This is beneficial for those who tend to course correct early, and damaging for those who double down on the wrong direction. The zodiac signs that move ahead faster tend to adjust naturally without turning every decision into an emotional battle. There is also a psychological component that matters deeply, especially for a US audience accustomed to long-term planning. In 2026, the usual relationship between effort and reward shifts. People who are used to pushing harder when things don't work may find themselves exhausted with little to show for it. Meanwhile, others who focus on clarity, structure, and timing begin to see money flow with less resistance. This contrast can feel unfair, but it's simply how fast cycles operate. Efficiency beats intensity when time compresses. It's important to understand that the 7 zodiac signs are not immune to loss. They are simply less likely to be overwhelmed by the year's speed. They process information faster, make cleaner decisions, or know when to disengage. That's why they often appear lucky from the outside. In truth, they are responding appropriately to conditions that others struggle to interpret. In a year like 2026, interpretation matters more than effort. Another factor that limits the number is emotional regulation. The fire horse year amplifies emotion, excitement, urgency, frustration, desire. Financial decisions made under emotional pressure rarely age well. The zodiac signs that move ahead faster tend to experience the same emotions, but are less controlled by them. They recover faster after mistakes and don't chase momentum blindly. This emotional steadiness becomes a financial advantage when money is moving quickly and decisions carry immediate weight. Finally, the reason only 7 signs consistently benefit is that 2026 rewards alignment, not intention. Wanting progress isn't enough. Trying harder isn't enough. The year responds to how naturally someone fits into its rhythm. That fit shows up in how they handle speed, pressure, and responsibility when outcomes arrive sooner than expected. Some people grow clearer under pressure. Others grow scattered. The fire horse year magnifies that difference. As we move into the next section, we'll look at these 7 zodiac signs one by one, not to glorify them and not to suggest destiny, but to understand why each of them handles this year better than most, where their advantage comes from, how money moves toward them faster, and where the risks still remain. Because in a year that moves this quickly, knowing why something works is the only way to keep it working. Part 3: The 7 zodiac signs that get rich faster and why. 1 rat gets ahead by reading timing early. The rat doesn't get rich faster in 2026 by working harder, pushing louder, or taking bigger risks. It happens in a much quieter way. The advantage of the rat in a fire horse year begins with timing. While others are still trying to understand what's changing, the rat senses it early. Not intellectually, not through analysis alone, but through an instinctive awareness of when something is about to shift. In a year where speed defines outcomes, that early awareness becomes money. In American life, this often shows up as knowing when to pivot before pressure builds. The rat notices subtle signals: workload changes, market tone, people becoming restless, opportunities that feel slightly premature but promising. Where many people hesitate because things aren't fully clear yet, the rat moves just enough to be in position without overcommitting. This is crucial in 2026 because the fire horse year doesn't reward waiting for certainty. It rewards readiness. And readiness, for the rat, comes naturally. What truly sets the rat apart is adaptability. When conditions change quickly, some people freeze or double down on what they already decided. The rat adjusts. Not dramatically, not emotionally, but practically. A small change in direction early on saves enormous effort later. This is why rats often appear lucky this year. Opportunities seem to land in their lap, but what's really happening is that they're already standing where opportunity is about to pass through. Financially, this translates into faster movement of money rather than sudden windfalls. Income streams activate earlier. Side projects show traction sooner. Conversations that would normally take months to turn into results compress into weeks. The rat doesn't force these outcomes. It simply recognizes when momentum is building and steps into it before the window narrows. In 2026, those windows close quickly. Missing one doesn't mean failure, but it does mean lost time. The rat loses less time than most. There is also a psychological advantage that matters deeply this year. The fire horse energy creates urgency. Many people feel pressured to act, which leads to impulsive decisions. The rat experiences the same urgency, but responds with calculation instead of panic. This emotional regulation keeps mistakes small and recoverable. In a fast year, avoiding large mistakes is just as important as making good moves. The rat excels at this balance, which is why wealth builds more smoothly and with fewer interruptions. However, This advantage comes with a risk that should not be ignored. Because money and opportunities arrive faster, overconfidence becomes tempting. The rat may start believing that timing alone will always save them. In 2026, that belief can be costly. Lending money casually, taking on emotional financial obligations, or assuming every opportunity will turn out well can quickly drain the very advantage the rat holds. The year rewards precision, not generosity without boundaries. Another subtle danger is mental fatigue. Reading timing constantly requires awareness, and in a fast-moving year, that awareness can turn into restlessness if not managed well. The rats who do best in 2026 are the ones who keep their environment clear, their decisions simple, and their focus narrow. When clarity drops, timing becomes harder to read, and the edge dulls. Ultimately, the rat's success in 2026 isn't about dominance or speed for its own sake. It's about alignment with the year's rhythm. The fire horse moves fast, but it burns unpredictably. The rat knows how to stay close enough to benefit from the heat without getting scorched. That skill allows money to arrive earlier, move more smoothly, and stay longer. And as we move on to the next zodiac sign, one thing becomes clear in a year like this: the ability to sense when matters just as much as knowing what to do. 2. Tiger gets rich faster by moving boldly. The tiger's advantage in 2026 is not subtle. It doesn't come from waiting, sensing, or quietly adjusting. It comes from movement. The fire horse year responds strongly to action, and the tiger is one of the few signs that doesn't hesitate when momentum begins to build. While others pause to reassess, the tiger steps forward. In a year where speed shortens opportunity windows, that willingness to move becomes a direct financial advantage. In everyday American life, this often shows up as leadership. Tigers are more likely to take charge when situations feel uncertain. They volunteer for responsibility when others pull back. They initiate changes, career shifts, business expansions, relocations, new roles before everything feels perfectly secure. In calmer years, this trait can be risky. In 2026, it is rewarded because the year itself favors forward motion. The fire horse does not wait for perfect conditions, and neither does the tiger. What allows tigers to get rich faster this year is not reckless courage, but confidence under pressure. When decisions need to be made quickly, tigers are less paralyzed by fear of getting it wrong. They trust their instincts and accept that adjustment can happen later. This is critical in a year where hesitation costs more than imperfect action. Money flows sooner to those who are willing to commit energy, resources, and presence, while others are still calculating. Financially, this can look like rapid career advancement, increased visibility, or faster business growth. Tigers often find themselves noticed more in 2026. Their ideas gain traction faster. Their efforts attract attention from decision makers. Opportunities that would normally take years to mature show signs of payoff much earlier. This doesn't mean every move succeeds, but enough of them do to create real momentum. And momentum, in this year, compounds quickly. There is also an emotional component that works in the tiger's favor. The fire horse year heightens intensity. Many people feel overwhelmed by the pace and retreat into caution. The tiger, by contrast, becomes energized by the same pressure. Stress sharpens their focus instead of scattering it. This emotional resilience allows tigers to operate effectively while others burn energy worrying about outcomes. In fast cycles, emotional stamina translates directly into financial advantage. However, this strength carries a serious risk, and it is one of the most important warnings for tigers in 2026. Moving boldly only works when there is something solid beneath the movement. The temptation this year is to scale too fast, taking on too much debt, too many obligations, or too many parallel projects. The fire horse amplifies both growth and collapse. For tigers, the line between expansion and overreach is thin, and crossing it can undo progress just as quickly as it was made. Another vulnerability lies in pride. Success may arrive early for tigers this year, and early success can distort judgment. When things work quickly, it becomes easy to assume they will continue working the same way. In 2026, that assumption is dangerous. The year rewards courage, but it punishes arrogance. Tigers who listen, ground themselves, and slow down just enough to check their foundation keep their gains. Tigers who ignore warning signs lose ground just as fast as they gained it. The tigers who do best are not the ones who charge blindly, but the ones who combine boldness with structure. They move decisively, but they keep their finances organized. They lead, but they don't dismiss caution entirely. They understand that in a year like this, speed must be supported by discipline. Without that balance, the very energy that pushes them forward becomes destabilizing. In essence, the tiger gets rich faster in 2026 because the year finally matches their natural rhythm. Action is rewarded, leadership is visible, momentum is real. But this same year demands restraint beneath the courage. As we move to the next zodiac sign, a contrast begins to emerge because not all wealth in 2026 comes from bold moves. Some of it comes from steadiness, patience, and quiet growth, which is where the next sign enters the picture. 3. Rabbit builds wealth quietly, but sooner than expected. The rabbit rarely looks like it's winning until time passes and the results are undeniable. In 2026, this quiet advantage becomes especially powerful. While the firehorse year is loud, fast, and demanding, the rabbit doesn't try to match its volume. Instead, it moves in a way that stays steady beneath the noise. And that steadiness is exactly why wealth arrives sooner than expected. Unlike signs that rely on bold action or rapid shifts, the rabbit benefits from consistency. In a year where many people burn energy reacting to constant change, the rabbit maintains routines, systems, and relationships that continue working even as the pace increases. This doesn't feel dramatic in the moment. There are no sudden leaps or headline moments, but money begins to move earlier because fewer things get disrupted. Progress isn't delayed by chaos, conflict, or constant course correction. In everyday American life, this often shows up as dependable growth. A role becomes more secure. A business stabilizes earlier in the year. Income streams that once felt uncertain begin to settle into predictable patterns. The rabbit doesn't rush to capitalize on every opportunity that appears. Instead, it improves what's already working. In 2026, that refinement pays off faster than most people expect, because the fire horse year rewards structures that don't need constant attention. What gives the rabbit an edge is emotional intelligence. The intensity of 2026 unsettles many people. Urgency creeps into conversations. Pressure leaks into decisions. The rabbit notices this and instinctively avoids environments where tension overrides clarity. That avoidance isn't weakness, it's strategy. By staying out of unnecessary conflict and stress, the rabbit preserves energy, which translates directly into better financial decisions. In a fast year, calm becomes currency. Financially, this means fewer costly mistakes. The rabbit is less likely to chase trends, overspend under pressure, or commit to something that doesn't feel stable. While others jump from one opportunity to the next, the rabbit builds depth. Clients stay longer. Projects mature instead of collapsing. Money arrives not in spikes, but in reliable waves. And because those waves begin earlier in 2026, the rabbit quietly pulls ahead while others are still recovering from false starts. There is also a timing element that often surprises people. The rabbit may not feel like much is happening at first. Early in the year, progress can feel slow compared to louder signs. But by mid-year, the gap becomes visible. While others deal with the consequences of rushed decisions, the rabbit's earlier patience begins to compound. What felt like modest movement turns into a solid lead. This delayed acceleration is why rabbit wealth in 2026 is often underestimated until it's already established. That said, the rabbit's strength carries a hidden risk. Because things improve quietly, it's easy to overlook boundaries. The rabbit tends to trust, to accommodate, to smooth things over. In a fast year, that kindness can be exploited. Lending money without clarity, agreeing to vague terms, or assuming others will be as careful as you are can slowly drain progress. Losses don't arrive dramatically, they leak in small, persistent ways. In 2026, even small leaks matter. Another challenge is self-doubt. The rabbit may question whether it's moving fast enough when surrounded by louder success stories. That comparison can tempt unnecessary changes. The rabbits who do best resist that urge. They understand that speed looks different for them. Their version of faster isn't about acceleration, it's about fewer setbacks. While others restart repeatedly, the rabbit keeps going. Ultimately, the rabbit gets rich faster in 2026 by staying grounded while everything else accelerates. The fire horse year tests endurance, not just ambition. The rabbit passes that test by protecting stability, choosing calm over reaction, and allowing momentum to build naturally. Wealth arrives earlier not because the rabbit pushes harder, but because it doesn't have to undo mistakes later. As we move to the next zodiac sign, the contrast becomes sharper. Where the rabbit grows quietly and steadily, the next sign's advantage comes from visibility and authority. In a year like 2026, both paths can lead to wealth, but only when they're used in the right way. 4. Dragon gets rich faster through visibility and authority. The dragon does not move quietly in 2026, and it is not meant to. Unlike the rat, who benefits from timing, or the rabbit, who grows through stability, the dragon's advantage comes from being seen. The fire horse year amplifies presence, and the dragon naturally carries presence without having to demand it. In a year where attention turns into opportunity faster than usual, this becomes a direct pathway to wealth. What changes for the dragon in 2026 is not talent, intelligence, or ambition. Those were always there. What changes is how quickly others respond to them. Conversations carry more weight, opinions land harder. Decisions made by dragons tend to ripple outward instead of disappearing into the background. In professional and financial environments across the US, this often shows up as increased trust. People defer more easily, offers come with less negotiation. Visibility turns into authority, and authority turns into money. This is a year where reputation pays dividends. Dragons who have spent years building credibility suddenly find that doors open faster. A leadership role expands. A business gains traction through word of mouth instead of constant effort. A personal brand becomes profitable without aggressive promotion. The fire horse year accelerates recognition, and the dragon is one of the few signs that can hold that recognition without shrinking or apologizing for it. There is also a psychological alignment at play. Many people struggle when attention increases. They second-guess themselves or overperform to justify being seen. Dragons are more comfortable with responsibility. When expectations rise, they rise with them. That emotional steadiness under visibility is rare, and in 2026, it becomes extremely valuable. The dragon doesn't need to chase influence, it naturally occupies it. And in a fast-moving year, influence shortens the distance between decision and reward. Financially, this often translates into opportunities that bypass the usual hurdles. Promotions don't stall, deals move faster. Dragons are trusted with larger budgets, bigger roles, or more autonomy, all of which increase earning potential quickly. Wealth arrives sooner not because dragons work harder, but because fewer barriers slow them down. In a year defined by speed, removing friction is as powerful as adding effort. However, this advantage carries one of the sharpest risks of any sign in 2026. Visibility magnifies everything, including flaws. The same energy that lifts dragons quickly can expose them just as fast if ego takes over. Confidence is necessary this year. Arrogance is dangerous. When authority turns into entitlement, the fire horse energy pushes back. Decisions made to protect image instead of substance tend to unravel quickly. Another vulnerability lies in shortcuts. Because dragons often find success arriving early in 2026, there can be temptation to lean into speculation, high-risk investments, or deals that promise fast returns without solid foundations. This year does not forgive gambling disguised as confidence. Wealth gained without structure is unstable, and for dragons, instability under visibility can damage reputation as well as finances. In a year where image equals leverage, that damage is costly. The dragons who do best are those who balance strength with restraint. They speak clearly but listen carefully. They lead, but they don't dismiss feedback. They understand that authority must be grounded to last. In practical terms, this means focusing on real value skills, systems, relationships rather than chasing excitement or proving dominance. The Fire Horse year supports leadership, but it tests character at the same time. There is also an emotional lesson for dragons in 2026. Being seen constantly can be draining. The pressure to perform, decide, and represent can build quietly. Dragons who protect their mental clarity by simplifying commitments and maintaining personal boundaries keep their edge. Those who allow constant demands to scatter their focus lose precision, and in a fast year, imprecision is expensive. Ultimately, the dragon gets rich faster in 2026 because the year amplifies authority and rewards those who can carry it responsibly. Visibility becomes leverage. Trust becomes currency. But this path only works when confidence stays connected to humility. As we move to the next zodiac sign, the tone shifts again because not all wealth in 2026 comes from being seen. Some of it comes from discipline and restraint, especially when temptation runs high. 5. Snake gets rich faster through discipline, not luck. The snake does not win in 2026 by moving faster than everyone else. It wins by moving cleaner. In a Fire Horse year filled with temptation, noise, and urgency, the snake's advantage comes from restraint. While others feel pulled in multiple directions at once, the snake narrows its focus. And in a year where speed amplifies both gains and losses, that narrowing becomes a powerful financial edge. What separates the snake from most people in 2026 is its relationship with desire. The Fire Horse year intensifies, wants more money, more recognition, more excitement, more stimulation. Many people confuse this intensity with opportunity and chase it blindly. The snake feels the same pull, but doesn't obey it automatically. There is a pause, often invisible to others, where the snake evaluates whether something is worth the cost. That pause saves money, energy, and reputation in ways that compound quickly. In American life, this often shows up as discipline around lifestyle and choices. The snake is less likely to spend to relieve stress or to impress. It avoids distractions that drain focus, even when those distractions are socially acceptable. While others upgrade prematurely, overextend financially, or say yes to every attractive offer, the snake quietly protects its margins. In 2026, margins matter more than volume. Money moves faster, but it also leaks faster when discipline slips. Financial progress for the snake this year tends to arrive later than for some signs, but when it arrives, it locks in firmly. The Fire Horse energy rewards precision. Deals close when details are right. Promotions stick when preparation has been thorough. Investments mature when timing is controlled. The snake understands this instinctively. It doesn't rush to be first. It waits to be correct. And in a fast year, correctness outperforms haste over time. Another key advantage is emotional containment. The Fire Horse year heightens attraction toward people, experiences, and shortcuts that promise relief or excitement. For the snake, crossing emotional boundaries has immediate consequences. Decisions made under emotional entanglement tend to unravel quickly, draining both focus and finances. The snakes who thrive in 2026 are those who remain clean in their commitments. They separate personal desire from financial judgment, and that separation protects their momentum. There is also a strategic patience at work. The snake often appears inactive to others early in the year. While momentum builds around them, they observe. They let patterns reveal themselves. By the time they move, the landscape is clearer and the risks are smaller. This is why snake wealth in 2026 often concentrates toward the latter part of the year. What looks like delay is actually consolidation. When action finally comes, it is decisive and profitable. The primary risk for the snake is subtle and internal. Because discipline works so well, it can turn into rigidity. The snake may become overly cautious, missing opportunities that require timely engagement. In a year that moves quickly, excessive control can be just as limiting as recklessness. The snakes who do best know when to loosen slightly, choosing moments where controlled action is better than continued restraint. Discipline is not avoidance, it is selective engagement. Another danger lies in indulgence disguised as reward. After long periods of self-control, the temptation to finally enjoy success can arrive suddenly. In 2026, those moments are dangerous. Overindulgence doesn't erase progress immediately. it erodes it quietly. Spending to escape pressure, relaxing boundaries just this once, or allowing distractions back in can weaken the very structure that created success. The fire horse year doesn't punish instantly, it exposes over time. Ultimately, the snake gets rich faster in 2026, not because the year favors it, but because the snake knows how to survive intensity without losing direction. Discipline keeps decisions sharp. Restraint keeps energy focused. Integrity keeps momentum intact. While others burn brightly and fade, the snake moves steadily toward outcomes that last. As we move to the next zodiac sign, the pattern shifts again. Where the snake protects wealth through self-control, the next sign attracts wealth through connection and faces an entirely different kind of risk in a year that moves this fast. 6. Pay wealth comes through people and can leave the same way. The pig's financial story in 2026 is not written through speed, strategy, or bold moves. It is written through people. In a fire horse year where pressure runs high and trust feels scarce, the pig carries something increasingly valuable: sincerity. This is the sign that others feel safe with. And in 2026, safety becomes currency. Opportunities, support, and financial openings often come to the pig not through force, but through connection. What changes in 2026 is how quickly those connections turn into material results. In calmer years, goodwill takes time to convert into opportunity. In a fast year like this one, introductions lead to offers sooner. Conversations turn into collaboration faster. Help arrives before it's even requested. The pig benefits because it naturally builds rapport without calculation. People want to assist, recommend, and include the pig, especially when uncertainty makes trust harder to find elsewhere. In the context of American life, this often looks like doors opening through networks rather than applications. A former colleague reaches out, a friend makes an introduction. A casual relationship suddenly becomes professionally meaningful. The pig doesn't chase these moments. They appear because the pig has already invested years into being reliable, generous, and emotionally present. In 2026, that investment begins to pay earlier than expected. Financially, this can create a sense of being protected. While others struggle to access resources or support, the pig finds that help shows up at the right time. This doesn't always look like sudden wealth. More often, it looks like stability, steady income, fewer disruptions, and timely assistance that prevents loss. In a year where many people lose ground because they face pressure alone, the pig moves ahead because it rarely does. However, this same pathway carries one of the most delicate risks of the year. When wealth comes through people, it can also leave through people. The pig's openness, which is its greatest strength, becomes a vulnerability when boundaries are unclear. Trusting too easily, agreeing to vague arrangements, or offering financial help without structure can quietly drain progress. In 2026, losses for the pig rarely arrive dramatically. They leak slowly through misplaced loyalty. Another challenge lies in emotional decision-making. The fire horse year intensifies feeling, and the pig is naturally sensitive to the emotional states of others. There is a tendency to soften decisions to avoid discomfort or conflict. In financial matters, this can be costly. Saying yes when something feels unclear, or staying in an arrangement out of kindness rather than clarity, erodes the pig's advantage. The year moves too fast to absorb repeated small losses without consequence. The pigs who do best in 2026 learn a critical lesson: generosity must be paired with discernment. Kindness does not require access to your wallet. Support does not require sacrificing stability. When the pig begins to define clear limits, written agreements, clear expectations, firm timelines, relationships actually improve rather than suffer. People respect clarity, especially in a fast year where confusion creates risk. There is also a quiet power in the pig's ability to receive. Many people struggle to accept help without guilt. The pig is more comfortable with reciprocity. In 2026, this matters. When support is offered, accepting it gracefully allows momentum to continue. Refusing help out of pride or discomfort slows progress unnecessarily. The pig's openness to receiving, when balanced with boundaries, becomes a key reason wealth moves earlier and more smoothly. Emotionally, the pig's challenge is learning that protection is not isolation. Pulling back too far after a disappointment can shut down the very channel that brings opportunity. The goal in 2026 is not to trust less, but to trust better. Choosing who gets access becomes more important than choosing how much to give. Ultimately, the pig gets rich faster in 2026 because people move towards sincerity in uncertain times. Relationships become bridges, not obstacles. But those bridges must be maintained carefully. When the pig honors both compassion and structure, wealth doesn't just arrive, it stays. As we move to the final zodiac sign, the energy shifts once more. Where the pig is supported by others, the next sign is pushed by the year itself, and that creates the fastest movement of all along with the greatest risk if balance is lost. 7 Horse, the fastest rise in 2026 and the highest burnout risk. No zodiac sign moves with the fire horse year as directly as the horse itself. In 2026, the horse does not feel the year approaching from the outside, it feels it moving straight through the body, the schedule, the nervous system. This is a Ben Ming year, which means everything intensifies. Effort produces results faster. Decisions carry more weight, momentum builds quickly. For the horse, this creates the fastest rise of all 7 signs, but it also creates the greatest risk if energy is not managed carefully. What sets the horse apart in 2026 is sheer alignment. The year favors movement, action, visibility, and forward drive. These are natural horse traits. While other signs need to adjust to the pace, the horse feels energized by it. Tasks that once felt heavy now feel possible. Opportunities cluster together instead of appearing one at a time. From mid-year onward, especially, many horses notice acceleration, career shifts, financial breakthroughs, or major life changes happening in quick succession. This is why the horse often experiences money moving faster than ever before. In the context of American life, this may look like working longer hours with visible payoff, stepping into leadership roles, or finally seeing long-term efforts gain traction. The horse is more willing than most to say yes, to take on responsibility, and to push through discomfort. In 2026, that willingness is rewarded. The fire horse year does not penalize ambition, it fuels it. And when ambition meets opportunity, income can rise sharply. However, this same alignment creates the horse's biggest vulnerability. When fire meets fire, the result is not always sustainable heat, it can become burnout. The horse's instinct is to keep moving, especially when things are working. Rest feels unnecessary, even wasteful. But in a year where everything accelerates, exhaustion doesn't announce itself politely. It creeps in quietly, and by the time it's noticed, judgment has already weakened. Financially, burnout shows up in subtle ways. Decisions become reactive instead of intentional. Small mistakes slip through. Spending increases as a way to cope with pressure. The horse may continue earning well while slowly leaking energy and money at the same time. Because success is visible, these leaks are often ignored. But in a fast year, small leaks widen quickly. Another risk lies in overextension. Opportunities arrive so quickly for the horse that boundaries blur. Saying yes becomes automatic. Commitments stack on top of each other. The horse may feel indispensable, which reinforces the cycle. In 2026, being needed can feel flattering, but it can also trap momentum in too many directions. Wealth grows fastest when energy is concentrated. Scattered effort slows results, even in a powerful year. Emotionally, the horse must also watch impatience. When momentum is high, delays feel intolerable. This can lead to rushed agreements, overlooked details, or dismissing concerns that deserve attention. The fire horse year amplifies consequences. What might be a minor issue in another year becomes expensive in this one. Horses who pause just long enough to verify decisions protect their gains without losing speed. The horses who thrive most in 2026 are not the ones who run non-stop. They are the ones who learn to regulate intensity. They treat rest as strategy, not weakness. They protect their personal space, especially their sleep and home environment, because recovery becomes a financial tool. Clear routines, simplified priorities, and deliberate pauses allow the horse to sustain momentum without burning out. There is also an important shift in mindset that benefits the horse this year. Success does not require proving strength at every moment. In fact, the Fire Horse year responds better to contained power than constant output. Horses who choose when to push and when to step back maintain clarity. That clarity preserves both health and wealth. Ultimately, the horse gets rich fastest in 2026 because the year amplifies its natural drive. Money, opportunity, and recognition move quickly when action is consistent. But this same speed demands wisdom. Without balance, gains slip away through exhaustion. With balance, 2026 becomes a defining year one where progress is not only fast, but sustainable. As we move toward the closing of this discussion, one truth becomes clear across all 7 signs. The Fire Horse year does not ask who wants success the most. It asks who can move quickly without losing themselves in the process. Part 4: Why fast wealth can disappear just as fast. In 2026, losing money rarely looks dramatic. It doesn't arrive as a single bad decision or an obvious collapse. It happens quietly, while things still appear to be going well. That's what makes the Fire Horse year dangerous for people who experience early success. When money starts moving faster than expected, the instinct is to relax, to assume momentum will carry itself, to believe the hard part is over. In this year, that assumption is exactly what causes wealth to slip away. The Fire Horse year compresses cause and effect. Actions don't take years to reveal their consequences. They show results quickly, both good and bad. When income rises faster, spending habits tend to rise with it. When opportunities increase, commitments multiply. When recognition grows, pressure grows alongside it. None of these things are harmful on their own. The problem is that they often change faster than awareness does. People adjust their lifestyle before they stabilize their foundation, and the gap between the two becomes a leak. One of the most common reasons fast wealth disappears in 2026 is exhaustion. The year rewards movement, but it also punishes depletion. When people run on adrenaline, they make poorer decisions without realizing it. They skip details. They overlook warning signs. They agree to terms they would normally question. Financial mistakes made under fatigue are rarely catastrophic in isolation, but in a fast year, they stack quickly. What begins as momentum turns into maintenance, and maintenance quietly drains profit. Another reason wealth fades is emotional drift. Early success creates confidence, but in 2026, confidence can slide into assumption. People stop checking their numbers as closely. They trust that things will work out because they've been working so far. They take emotional risks lending money, supporting others financially, entering vague partnerships without clear boundaries. In slower years, those decisions might not matter much. In this year, they matter immediately. Money moves out as easily as it came in. There is also a subtle shift in identity that causes loss. When people start seeing themselves as successful, they often feel pressure to maintain that image. This can lead to spending that isn't strategic, commitments that aren't aligned, or decisions made to avoid disappointment rather than to protect stability. In American culture, success is often tied to visible progress. In 2026, chasing visibility can be expensive. The Fire Horse year rewards substance, not appearance. When image starts driving decisions, wealth becomes fragile. Another major factor is overextension. Fast money creates the illusion that capacity has increased. People believe they can handle more projects, more responsibilities, more obligations at once. In reality, capacity grows slower than opportunity. When too many things demand attention, quality drops. Missed details, delayed responses, and fractured focus all create financial drag. In a year where efficiency determines outcome, fragmentation is costly. It's also important to understand that fast wealth exposes weak systems. Poor budgeting, unclear agreements, and informal financial arrangements might survive in calm years. In 2026, they fail. The year does not tolerate ambiguity. Money moves too quickly for disorganization. Those who don't track clearly, document properly, and structure their finances find themselves confused about where the money went, even while they were earning more than before. At a deeper level, fast wealth disappears when people confuse momentum with security. Momentum is temporary. Security is built. The Fire Horse year provides momentum generously, but it does not build foundations for you. That work still requires intention. Those who reinvest wisely, simplify their commitments, and protect their energy convert speed into stability. Those who assume speed equals safety lose ground once the pace becomes unsustainable. The most important truth of 2026 is this: the year does not punish success. It tests stewardship. Money that arrives quickly asks a question immediately: can you manage it without changing who you are? Can you stay clear while moving fast? Can you protect your health, your home, and your judgment while opportunity accelerates? If the answer is yes, wealth stays. If the answer is no, it leaves quietly, often without warning. This is why the fire horse year creates such sharp contrasts. Two people can earn the same amount and end the year in completely different places. One feels stable and ahead. The other feels tired, confused, and unsure where the gains went. The difference is not luck. It is awareness. As we move toward the final reflection, one message becomes clear across all 7 zodiac signs. Speed is not the gift of 2026. Clarity is. And only those who protect clarity are able to keep what the year delivers so quickly. Final. As we come to the end of this discussion, it's important to pause for a moment and look at what 2026 is truly asking for. Not more effort, not more ambition, and not blind optimism. The fire horse year is not a year that rewards noise. It rewards awareness. What you've seen across these 7 zodiac signs is not a promise of easy wealth, but a pattern of how speed interacts with human behavior. Some people naturally move well when life accelerates. Others struggle not because they are less capable, but because speed exposes habits that were never meant to operate under pressure. What makes this year feel intense is not the volume of opportunity, but the compression of time. Results arrive sooner, consequences arrive sooner, and clarity becomes far more valuable than motivation. Across the rat, the tiger, the rabbit, the dragon, the snake, the pig, and the horse, one theme repeats quietly but consistently: those who do well are not chasing more, they are managing better. They manage timing, they manage emotion, they manage energy, and because of that, money flows toward them with less resistance. If you recognized yourself in one of these signs, this is not a label, it's an invitation. An invitation to lean into what already works for you, and to protect yourself where your natural tendencies become risks. If you didn't recognize yourself, that doesn't mean 2026 has nothing to offer. It simply means the year is asking you to slow down, observe more carefully, and adjust how you respond to speed. Not every year asks us to grow faster. Some years ask us to grow wiser. From a practical standpoint, the science behind all of this is simple. Fast environments reward clarity, structure, and emotional regulation. Slow environments reward endurance. The fire horse year is a fast environment. When money moves quickly, small decisions matter more, fatigue matters more, boundaries matter more, and the people who understand that early are the ones who end the year feeling steady instead of scattered. If there is one message to carry forward, it is this: 2026 is not a year to prove anything. It is a year to steward what arrives. Wealth that comes quickly asks for responsibility just as quickly. Those who honor that relationship keep what they gain. Those who don't often wonder where it went. Thank you for taking the time to stay with this conversation until the end. In a world that moves quickly, choosing to slow down and understand before acting is already a powerful decision. Wherever you are, and whatever this year brings to you, I wish you clarity in your choices, steadiness in your energy, and the kind of progress that feels calm, not rushed. May 2026 move you forward in ways that are not only faster, but wiser as well.